Hey, it's Professor Gould, and it's time to start learning some biology. To start off, let's just start with the simple question, what's biology? Well, it's the study of living things. And this is a phylogenetic tree, a graphic representation of the evolutionary relationships among living things. Everything alive on the planet has a common ancestor. It was something kind of like a bacterium that arose about 3.5 billion years ago. And one of the cool things about biology is that we can study some very basic processes, such as mitosis, that are shared with almost all of these organisms, and similar in these organisms. We can talk about a lot of work of biological processes and structures such as DNA that are literally shared by every single organism on the planet. If you're wondering about humans, where did we show up? We're over here in the corner. Hang on, let me zoom in a little bit. Here we are. There's humans. We are one tiny itty bitty branch, a really small part of this overall tree of life. Okay, so that's biology. What do we mean when we say science? Some of this is going to be reviewed, but stick with me, please. Science is two things. It's a body of knowledge. It's what we know about the natural world. So when we say that's just science, we know, well, usually we're being sarcastic, aren't we? Okay, when we say that's just science and we're serious, we mean that's the kind of thing that we've learned through the other definition of science, which is the process for acquiring knowledge about the natural world through the scientific method. The scientific method starts off with an observation, then we do some kind of detection, and then we measure it, and then we report our findings to others. The scientific method and science requires evidence. We have to be able to observe and measure things. We can't just believe something without evidence. That's not science. It must be able to be repeated by others. If you do an experiment and you come up with one result and someone else does the same experiment and comes up with a different result, then that's not good science, or that tells us something was wrong with the experiment. It is able to be challenged on the basis of evidence, and we are constantly doing this in science. And that's why what we know about some things changes, because we're challenging what we know, we're looking further into things that we've learned, and we are adjusting what we know to be true based on new evidence. It's also, in a certain way, self-correcting. This is one of the cool things about science. Now, this process can be really slow. Sometimes it takes 100 years before people start to realize what somebody had shown earlier because of people's deep-seated biases. But because science gets tested and challenged, we are able to say that thing that we thought was true is not in fact true. Here's what's actually true. So that's a really, really important thing about science. And that separates science from religion. And I want to take a moment to talk about the difference between science and religion, because some people they look at how much of science people don't understand and you can't understand, or certain people can't understand, and say, well, science is just another religion. And that is not correct. So I want to talk about what science is and what religion is. Science is conclusions based on observations. It could be a direct observation or it could be an indirect observation. A lot of what we know about the planets in, say, other solar systems is based on the fact that that light bends as it moves around things because of gravity, and so we can tell something about planets by the way that light moves through the universe. Religion is faith without observations. If you have to have evidence in order to have faith, then you don't have faith. You have a belief based on evidence. Religion, and in particular and primarily, I am talking about modern Christianity, requires a faith in God based on the belief in God without observations. Science has to be tested. Religion, you don't test God. And if you do try to test religion, say, I'm going to pray for rain, and it doesn't rain, that doesn't mean your religion is incorrect. That's not how religion works. Science focuses on what is true about the natural world, what we can see and measure and observe around us. Religion reveals truths about the spiritual world. These are two entirely different things. You get into trouble when you insist that either religion or science has something definitive to say about the other. Any scientist who said, well, there's no evidence for God, therefore religion is stupid, is being a bad scientist. Of course there's no evidence for God. You can't test the existence of God. There's no hypothesis that you can test. And so that's bad science. Anyone who takes their religious text and believes that in place of the knowledge that we have from science about the natural world is using religion in a way that is outside that realm. They are not incompatible. I personally know many scientists who deeply and strongly believe in the existence of God. They are different things, but they are not mutually exclusive. But you need to understand what they are and what they can and can't do. All right, so when we do the scientific method, we start off with we start with an observation, and that leads us to a hypothesis. The observation is often, that's weird. I wonder what's going on there. A hypothesis is a statement that we make to try to explain it and to create something that we can test. So the hypothesis is a statement. That statement is a tentative answer to a question. It is a proposed explanation for something that we've seen, one thing or several things that we've seen, and it is one step in the scientific process. It's a really important step because it's going to shape the next steps that we do. We're going to talk more about that later this week. In the scientific method, you first make an observation. So here's a little baby saying, what is this green thing on the floor? Then forming a hypothesis. Baby says, this must be good to eat. Baby performs an experiment, tastes the green thing, analyzes the data, turns green, was not good, reports the finding. In this case, the baby yells. In science, we report our findings in scientific journals and at scientific meetings. And then you invite others to reproduce the results. So you say, this is what I got. What do you think? And so you give it to your little brother and let them try it. So that's how the scientific method works. You're actually using it all the time without thinking about it. And then the other part of the scientific method that happens constantly is that as we perform the experiment and analyze the data, we refine our hypothesis and try again. So we're constantly revising. So a hypothesis is a proposed explanation. It has to be testable. It has to be disprovable, which is why there is no God is not a hypothesis. You can't disprove it. Now, a lot of people say, oh, well, evolution is just a theory. A theory is a scientific thing, and it's a very specific scientific thing. It explains many, many observations, and it's supported by lots and lots of experiments, observations, and measurements. The theory of evolution by natural selection was developed by Charles Darwin and to a lesser degree Alfred Russel Wallace, and has been supported by biology, genetics, microbiology for 150 years. There has been no evidence that pointed us in a different direction. That's important. So it's not just a theory, like it's just an idea. That's what a hypothesis is. A hypothesis is an idea that we're testing. A theory is an idea that explains things and is well supported. Now, some people say that a theory grows up to become a law. That's not really true. A law is simply a statement that explains something that is observed. A theory explains the observations and how they happen, whereas a law says this happens. Okay, so the difference is the law of evolution, and yes, there is such a thing, says that populations change over generations. The theory of evolution by natural selection says that that change happens because organisms that are better fitted to the environment pass on more of their DNA because they have more offspring. That's the difference between those things. A theory is able to explain multiple laws. So it's really important that you understand these three things and can distinguish among them. So, for example, a law says that animals with white fur are hard to see in snowy habitats. That's pretty simple, right? A hypothesis is that white fur is an adaptation that helps polar bears survive in the Arctic. The theory is larger, encompasses more. It says animals better adapted to the local environment are better able to survive and reproduce. That's the distinction between those three. All right, science isn't perfect. That's the other thing that separates science from other studies. Scientific theories aren't perfect either. Scientific theories make predictions and we can test them. And sometimes we have to go back and adjust the original theory a little bit. And we have made a few adjustments to the theory of evolution by natural selection since Darwin's time. There were some things that Darwin got wrong, and we will talk more about that later in the semester. So that's what I want you to know about science and biology basics. Next up, we're going to talk more about the bio part of biology, and we're going to talk about what it means to be alive.